It's midday in Freetown. Good afternoon and welcome to the podium. My name is Daphne Zainab Kamar. Our quote for today comes from Karl Cross, an author, and it says, "Corruption is worse than prostitution. The latter might endanger the morals of an individual. The former invariably endangers the morals of the entire country." Coming up in this edition of the podium, President Julius Maada Bio appoints a Nigerian judge, Justice Biobele George-Will, to serve as chairman of the judge-led commission of inquiry as recommended by the governance transition team. And we shall be talking to the Deputy Minister of Information and Communication on the proposed commission of inquiry and a member of the Initiative for Democracy and Rule of Law that has raised concern on the integrity of the judge who is to lead the commission. Well, all these issues are coming up in this edition of the podium, which you can be part of by sending your text messages to 088-373-504. The program is the podium, coming to you live on SLC television. Our first issue this afternoon, according to a press release from the Office of the President, President Julius Maada Bio has appointed a Nigerian judge, Justice Biobele George-Will, to serve as chairman of the judge-led commission of inquiry as recommended by the governance transition team. Justice Biobele George-Will is a justice of the Court of Appeal of Nigeria. In 2017, he chaired a 7-man commission on armed forces compliance with human rights that investigated alleged violation of citizens' rights by Nigerian security agencies. The setting up of a commission of inquiry is one of the recommendations by the governance transition team to investigate former President Kuruma, his ministers and other government officials for unexplained wealth and alleged corruption found out by the report. The constitutional instrument on the establishment of the commission has been tabled in Parliament and members are expected to debate it in the coming days. Well, to tell us more about this commission of inquiry, I have here with me in the studio the Deputy Minister of Information and Communications, Solomon Jamiru. Good afternoon and welcome to the podium.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon.
Before we go to the nitty-gritties of the Commission of Inquiry, it has been tabled in Parliament and we don't know yet if it will be approved. If not approved, will the Commission go on?
Well, it is government's expectation that it would, because as per Section 147 of the Constitution, once Cabinet has resolved that it would be in the public interest to have a commission of inquiry, then President makes the appointment by statutory instrument, which he has already done, and it has to be tabled in Parliament for 21 days. So it's our expectation that indeed it will have the full length of 21 days and the commission would start its operation.
So it's our when will it start? After Parliament's debate, or
well,
is there a time that you...
Well, the Constitution says it has to be laid for 21 days. So we will now say that the operationalization of the Commission is now at its inception stage.
Okay. Also, let's come to what the Commission will delve into.
The statutory instruments laid in Parliament clearly express or give an idea of what the terms of reference would be. It's quite a huge portfolio to look at. You're looking at activities of President, Vice President, Ministers, Deputy Ministers, heads of parastatals, those who served in boards for the certain period. So indeed, the Commission would be focused on those activities. But by and large, it's important at this point especially for public consumption, to appreciate when we're talking about a Commission of Inquiry what we actually mean. Not all of us are legally minded, and not all of us would have done what we call administrative law to understand what we're saying. A commission of inquiry is a fact-finding commission, and in this sense, it is different from a normal judicial tribunal. If you go to the court now for a certain matter, It could be a civil matter or a criminal matter. We know, for example, in our Constitution, the High Court would hear and determine matters of a civil nature as well as of a criminal nature. Well, in this case, we are not talking about a matter going to court to be heard and determined. We are not talking about a trial. We are talking about an investigation. The Commission, it is when Cabinet has said, Cabinet determined following the GTT report, that it will be in the public interest to investigate certain things. So the Commission will be set up actually to investigate. Once the investigation is done, what the Commission would do is to record its findings and make certain recommendations for the consideration of government. So it is not going to try anybody, it is going to give an opportunity to people to give their version of events, but it is a fact finding, it is an investigative commission as opposed to a judicial tribunal. So
now that you've made it clear that it will be a fact finding, what time will they have to gather these facts, or will they base their findings on what the GTT report says?
Well, as a commission, they would have to have their own terms of reference. Okay. But it's important to note that, as the Constitution has said, the rules of court committee would have to come up with what we call rules of practice and procedure to guide the commission. But so what would happen is, in its operationalization, in carrying out its functions, the commission would have to adopt the civil and criminal rules applicable in the High Court, but just that the Commission will not be bound by the rules of evidence. So that is what is clear at this point.
Now, has the government or in the preparation stage of this commission have any reaction from those who are to face this commission? Is it possible for them to say anything before the investigation starts?
Well, I think, as we say in Latin, ex abundante cautela, in the abundance of caution, if you know you are, I mean, there's the existential or potential fact of you facing the commission, I think it's important to save your breath at this point.
Okay, you will say what you want to say. You'll be given due opportunity.
Absolutely. Okay. So there is an assurance that, of course, the commission would avail everybody due process at all stages.
Okay. Also, let's talk about the form in which it will take. Will we have public hearings? Will we have public witnesses giving evidences of what is stated in the report or in the investigations of the commission?
Well, in the Constitution, it is very clear that when you hold proceedings of a commission of inquiry, they have to be public unless and until advised otherwise, in the interest of public order, defense, safety, or so. Even in the constitutional instrument tabled in Parliament, it has given sufficient indication that the meetings would be public unless otherwise advised.
Okay, so, and what about the witnesses?
Well, it's the, how I wish I was going to serve as the commissioner or chairman. I mean, I would have given you an idea of what would be the modus operandi. Okay. But I think in terms of witnesses, so what would happen is that whilst we appreciate that the Commission of Inquiry will not be a judicial tribunal, okay, but what would happen, as in every other Commission of Inquiry, in order to enable it to conduct its processes, they would have to ascribe to this commission some of the powers that high courts normally benefit from. Okay. So in terms of obtaining statements, examining witnesses, inspecting documents, this commission will benefit from some of the powers of the high court. So indeed, it would have to investigate and examine witnesses, but then it would have to determine who to call and who not to call.
Yes, and that part, I like that part, because some may say the credibility of some of these witnesses are questionable.
Well, that is why it is important that in formulating the model for commissions of inquiry, at the outset you have to be very clear as to the stature and the experience of the person you are bringing in to preside over the proceedings of the commission. You want to bring in somebody, and the Constitution advises that it is important you have somebody who is a judge in a superior court of judicature, or who had served as a judge, or who is qualified to serve as a judge in the superior court. The reason why the Constitution had to stipulate it that way is because you want to have somebody who has the necessary experience, who knows what it is when you have proceedings of that nature, who knows what it means to recognize and uphold the rights of persons who appear before you. So I think due process will be followed all the way through.
And talking about due process, will we see a commission that allows major interests to take part in the inquiry process so as to help people to secure the acceptance of the outcome?
I think it's very important in terms of having the necessary independence that we expect, and also to ensure, because what is important at this point is the principle we call odi alteram partem, hear the other side, and make sure you ascribe to the other side the necessary rights and privileges that that person should enjoy. And I think this commission would bear that in mind, and looking at the stature of the persons who will be presiding at the top, I think they bear that in mind, and they have demonstrated that kind of pedigree throughout.
Okay, let's talk about the composition, the people who are to lead this commission of inquiry.
Absolutely. We recall that once the GTT generated its report and cabinets convened and they adopted the recommendations in the report, then we got indication that it's government's thinking to have a judge, a fine blend of a judge that has local character and repute, as well as an international, a judge of international character and repute. So the good thing that has happened is now we are talking about two individuals, one of whom may be specifically known to us, Justice Bankole Thompson. Justice Bankole Thompson is a Sierra Leonean, and he has such national and international recognition and respectability. He had been in the special court. I worked in the special court in the office of the principal defender for 5 to 6 months. I never had the opportunity to work with him, but I know that glowing tributes have been paid to him. And also we're talking about Justice Bilbel George Will, who comes from Nigeria, who also sits in the Court of Appeal in Nigeria, and who has contributed so much to not only legal development and judicial reforms, but also jurisprudence in Nigeria as well. And he is somebody who has also had the opportunity to sit in commissions, so he knows what it means, and he comes with that experience as well.
So a thorough research was done on his personality and character, because we are getting some feedback from the public that they're saying his integrity is not that up to standard.
Well, it's always, you know, when you occupy a position of trust, or you preside over meetings of that nature, you are always normally not devoid from public criticisms and opinionated issues. Even here, I mean, remember when we had our Supreme Court and it sat on the matter of Samuel Sam Sumana, and the Supreme Court had to rule that President had, under his chief executive powers, supreme executive powers, had the right to dismiss the vice president. I mean, so many opinions levied, and we know so many indictments as well. So it's once you occupy a position of trust and you preside at that high level, absolutely people are entitled to their opinion. But on the part of government, we know we already have a fair appreciation of why this is important to us. Government has made a determination that it's a matter of public importance, and it's very important that having people to preside over the proceedings. Government has done its consultations and research, and we believe none of those persons really could suffer the kind of reproach that could be suggested. We think they are above board.
So in essence, you're saying that as long as it's stated that it's an independent commission of inquiry, they will be given the free will to do whatever they want to do without any government interference.
Absolutely. We want them to do that without...
Even though they were appointed by...
Absolutely. And you know, even in Sierra Leone, you know, from the Chief Justice to other judges, you know, they are appointed by the President on the recommendation of the Judicial and Legal Service Commission. But the fact that President appoints them would not mean that they could not be independent. So in this case, talking about commissions of inquiry, they will exhibit independence. And that's why for us, we would also say we're calling on the media and the civil society to follow the process. You know, as long as we are having public hearings, I'm sure you would have representation at those hearings, and you could formulate your own opinion and appreciation of things as well. But I believe on the side of government, we can give that assurance that those persons are tried, they are tested, they have sat at tribunals, they have displayed and demonstrated high quality of integrity and we think they can demonstrate that at this level.
Now, Mr. Minister, you yourself mentioned that the Sierra Leonean judge is of reputable character, and you also stated that being appointed by the government does not make you not independent. Why an outsider to head the Commission of Inquiry?
Well, the determination is very clear. It's not suggesting that we don't have Sierra Leoneans who can do the job. That's not what it's suggesting. Okay. But the same way you could say, why is it that, for example, our own Abdoulaye Conte, a very revered and respected legal practitioner, could become Chief Justice of the Caribbean country of Belize? Why is it that you could say our Honorable Justice Nicholas Brown-Mack, who sits in our Supreme Court, could also sit in the Supreme Court in the Gambia? There are Gambians who are well qualified. So I think it's always one of the things that define our global environment is what we call exchanges, and the fact that we can have outsiders to sit, to perform roles in our country as well as we could do. And don't forget, we had Nigerians come here, you know, to shed their blood for our motherland. So we have that relationship. But it's not done because we have a paucity of Sierra Leoneans. No, we just thought it's prudent to do, and perhaps it could help reinforce the issue of independence, because now these days in Sierra Leone it's easy for somebody to ascribe, you know, political considerations to certain persons even when they are not political at all.
Earlier you mentioned that the Commission of Inquiry will be given some of the benefits of the High Courts and all, and we know that commissions of inquiry are quasi, they are similar to court tribunals. Let's talk about what will be the what will come out of the recommendations they make. Who will make sure that they are adhered to? Who will take that decision?
Okay, now the Constitution is very clear that once the Commission has conducted its proceedings, it has recorded its findings, then it would generate a report. Okay. Now that report will contain not only the findings but the recommendations as well for the consideration of government. It is when the government now acts on those recommendations that those recommendations could now have an enforcement mechanism. Okay. So unless, and that's why it's important that you asked that question, because some people would now think, oh, now we have a judge coming from Nigeria or a judge here, they just want our people to just face the commission and then they seize their properties or they imprison them. No, the Commission of Inquiry is not a judicial tribunal. That's why we say it doesn't have the power of enforcement. Had it been in a court of law, for example, in a court where a judge will be hearing and determining a civil matter, if, for example, it gives a judgment in favor of the plaintiff, that the plaintiff now has judgment to recover a certain sum of money, what happens? You just prepare your FIFE, you lodge it with the under sheriff's office, and then they could just levy execution on your properties. In this case, the commission would not have those powers. It basically records findings and makes recommendations. It's when the government now acts on those recommendations that they could have the force of law.
Yeah, what I'm saying here, who is the government? Who will take that decision to act on these recommendations? That's what we want to know.
Once the report is submitted to government, and in government's thinking it has to act on it, then the report will now be made by a way of government, what we call a government white paper. Okay. And it is that white paper now that will make a definitive pronouncement on what happens to those recommendations.
Okay, thank you very much, and continue to stay with us. He is the Deputy Minister of Information and Communications, Solomon Jamiu. Well, in the studios, meanwhile, an organization, Initiative for Democracy, Rule of Law, has raised concern on the integrity of Justice Bill George Will, head of the proposed Commission of Inquiry. According to the organization, the proposed judge has over the years received a series of criticisms from national and international experts who strongly believe in judiciary as the only leg on which the state could rely. However, other analysts have praised George Will for cases he had won in Nigeria on issues of human rights violations. Some legal experts say Judge Bill Georgeville is one of the renowned judges for human rights and social and economic justice in Nigeria. Well, with me in the studio is Saidu Bangura, the Executive Director, Initiative for Democracy and the Rule of Law. Good afternoon. Welcome to the podium.
Good afternoon, SBC. Good afternoon, Sierra Leoneans.
So, which part of the judge's character you have a problem with?
Well, first of all, I want to acknowledge the efforts of His Excellency the President, retired Brigadier Julius Madabio, and his government for the serious efforts in the fight against corruption. In 2000, we have the late President, Ahmad Tijan Kaba, inaugurated and enacted the Anti-Corruption Commission Act. In 2008, we have the former President, Dr. Anes Baikoroma. He reviewed the Anti-Corruption Commission Act, which later became the Anti-Corruption Commission Act of 2008, which presently we are using to fight corruption in this country. Of course, as you've heard from Karl Kraus, of course, an American philosopher, who stated that corruption is worse than prostitution. That's fact, and that's fine. In as much as we as Sierra Leoneans, we appreciate the efforts of the President and the government in the fight against corruption, we must also not lose sight of the fact that individuals named in the reports, the GTTR reports, these are individuals with high moral esteem in society. I asked you
about the problem you have with the judge's character. That's what we're talking about. Now coming to the
issue of Georgeville.
That's what we are here to talk about.
In Nigeria, right? In my own findings, in 2017, when the issue of the human rights violations, he headed that commission, the Amnesty International, an international reputable human rights organization, has to shun his commission due to the fact that he has credibility issues, which emanated again from the case of the issue of the fracas at the House of Assembly in the River State of Nigeria in 2013, when he was appointed by the state governor then, Rotimi Amachi, in order to look into that issue. 5 members of the House of Representatives had to go to the High Court in Port Harcourt, and then they proceeded on the fact that the man's activity, the commission's activity, should be annulled, owing to the fact the man has credibility issues, that he was compromised by the then governor of the River States. So looking to that, looking to that issue, now this particular judge has been brought to Sierra Leone. He's a fine judge, I know. He may have contributed immensely to the development of Nigerian legal system. That's fine. But as far as my findings are concerned, he has credibility issues.
The credibility issues are coming from someone else's perception.
No.
Do you have a personal?
No, they are not coming from.
Yeah, because you quoted Amnesty International.
Yes, it's a reputable international human rights organization. Now,
what's your own proof?
Yeah, for me to say you are this, I must have had precedent. I must have had evidence to prove to the fact that yes, you are this.
That people say this.
And this is that's what we call a research. If you are appointed ahead of a particular institution, I have to conduct a research on your past dealings. And based on the past dealings, we discover that this particular judge has credibility issues. That was why even the High Court in Port Harcourt has to annul his commission of inquiry on the issue of the fracas at the House of Assembly, owing to the fact he was compromised by the then political state actors in that state. So now, my question here is, if this particular judge, in a minute state in Nigeria, he could not dispense justice as was expected, right? What are the assurances that he is going to give us? He's going to dispense justice to the fullest, to the maximum. What are the assurances that this particular judge will deliver? What are the assurances that indeed he's not going to be compromised by political state actors? Especially at a time when the chief minister in his report in the GTTI referred to the past, the then regime, as an organized criminal racketeering enterprise. Imagine short statement coming from a reputable individual in the state, and the executive arm of government is the third most influential person in the country. He has prejudiced the work he did. It's also prejudiced the outcomes of the commission of inquiry.
You have the minister explaining that the commission will do their findings.
Thank you very much. The commission will do their findings, of course, that's facts. But when you look at Section 148, subsection 1 of the Constitution, the Commission of Inquiry shall have short powers, rights, and privileges as are vested in the High Court of Justice or a judge thereof at a trial in respect of A. He is a judge, A. Enforcing the attendance of witnesses. B. Compelling the production of documents. And C. The issue of a commission or request to examine witnesses, right? Clearly tells you the Commission of Inquiry has powers given to the High Court to conduct its own activities, right? That is why, again, it went further to say that if you've been tried, if you have been investigated, right, at the end of the day, you are not satisfied, you could appeal to the Court of Appeal. So equally, that tells you it has the powers of the High Courts. So don't just tell me it's a fact-finding opinion, or it's a fact-finding institution, or fact-finding inquiry. Yes, it's a fact-finding, but it has some powers that give you that makes it very important in the states.
And also, Saidu, coming to you yourself attested to the fact that the judge that is to lead the Commission of Inquiry is a fine judge. But you brought those instances. Would it be an isolated incident? Because you said he's a fine judge.
No, well, saying he's a fine judge, he must have done good things in the state of in the country of Nigeria. No, I'm coming. You may have served in this institution for quite a while. You have your weaknesses. Yes, you have your successes.
Everybody does.
Fine. And so equally so, Justice Godwill of Nigeria may have had its weaknesses, which includes the issue of the river states.
So what's
in
the
Nigeria.
Percentage of his weaknesses and his strong points?
Well, we are talking of...
Does that give right for him to be just eliminated just
like
that?
Is
that what you want? You don't want...
Thank you very much.
That's what... Yeah,
it could take you 40 years to build a reputable character. Could be destroyed in a single day, single minute, single hour, single second. You know that. Fine, thanks. So here is Justice Godwill, who spent a long time in Nigeria building his reputable character, but in 2 instant cases, destroyed his reputable character. Go on the internet, search for Godwill. They will tell you about his weaknesses in the area of the river state and that of why the Amnesty International, a reputable human rights organization, shunned his Commission of Inquiry in 2017, which were due to his credibility issues. Okay. So if we have credibility issues in Nigeria, don't you think it could be compromised in the state in Sierra Leone?
Okay, thank you very much.
Especially where we have a politically fragile situation.
Let's have a response from the government side, okay? Just hold on, please. He is the Executive Director of Initiative for Democracy and the Rule of Law in Sierra Leone, Saidu Bangura. And Mr. Minister, you heard his argument. Let's talk about what he is saying.
Thank you very much. I was with Saidu at AYV this morning, and first of all, when I was asked for my reaction to Saidu, my first observation was it's difficult to react to him because Saidu, on the one hand, may seem to be indicting Justice Beobel Goodwin, and on the other hand, subtly, he seems to be appreciating he's a fine judge. So it's difficult to know where Saidu sits on the narrative. But I would say this, you know, when we're admitted to serve into the bar, and before you are made a judge, it has to be on what we call a certificate of good character. And to continue serving as a judge, there has to be a continuous flow of your certificate of good character. Not even from his peers in Nigeria, none of them has suggested this man lacks integrity, not even from the Bar Association of Nigeria. The fact that he continues to enjoy that office and the fact that he continues to sit stoutly so in the Court of Appeal, not a state Court of Appeal, in the Federal Court of Appeal. I just got through one case in which he served on the panel, which had to determine how do you establish a locus standi of a plaintiff, and he was just one of those judges. So he comes with that kind of pedigree. I don't know the instance Saidu may be referring to, because Saidu talks about a fracas in the House of Parliament, and then he said because he was connected to the powers that be, and that's why he had integrity issues. I mean, if that is the yardstick, if that is the parameter that you want to use to conclude that he had integrity issues because of he had some association with the powers that be, for me that's insufficient. And I also want us to understand that in judicial facets, having a proceeding and the proceedings are set aside will not mean that you have integrity issues. So, for example,
what if the reasons given are because of that?
Thank you very much.
No. Well, let him tell me the integrity issue. That's what I want Saidu now. Now he's talked about integrity issue. What was the integrity issue? Perhaps if Saidu gives us full and frank disclosures.
So can he
Fine. Thank you very much. Like I said earlier, in that particular case, the commission started its activities, conducting inquiries. At the end of the day, 5 House of representatives of the House of Assembly decided not to attend the commission of inquiry on the allegations that he has been compromised by the states. That was the argument they took to the High Court. And when they took it to the High Court did make some findings, and at the end of the day, this commission was annulled.
Was it proven that he...
Yeah, it was annulled. Yes, of course. The commission was annulled. It's not secret.
No, he's misrepresenting the fact.
No,
I would also ask you to Google on him. I would also ask you to Google on him. For example, when he sat on the commission which investigated alleged human rights abuses, for security reasons, they raised issues that the composition of that panel was an all-Christian panel, and that was why they had issues with that. And he spoke about politics. I mean, Saidu is saying he doesn't want this man to come here, you know, and then you have politicians to romance with him. It will not be done. And that's why for us as a government, we have said, this man has not only been brought here, but he'll be under the spotlight and under the scrutiny, not only of the media, but also in the very civil society in which Saidu finds himself. And I have said that when you serve as a judge, the moment your character becomes impeachable, you are impeached. You no longer serve as a judge. He continues to enjoy that status in the Nigerian society. And so you want to ask me why? Is it that his peers have not been watching him? Is it that the Judicial and Legal Service Commission of Nigeria are not privy to these facts of integrity? I mean, if he could enjoy those privileges and rights in Nigeria, it goes without saying that his integrity is already maintained. That's the point.
Okay, hold on a bit. Saidu, so what are you calling for as an organization?
Well, actually, I am not saying...
What do you recommend?
I am not saying the judge should not go on with his activities.
Okay.
I'm not saying we should stop him, right? But however, he must serve his conscience and not political state actors, like he did in the case of the River State in Nigeria, that led to the annulment of the commission. Sierra Leone is a politically fragile state, very weak as I speak. We have 2 major political parties. No sooner you make a small mistake, it leads to fracas, and we wouldn't want to see that in this country. And as much we're going to spend money on him, it's quite a huge sum of money, I'm sure. Though I cannot tell you as to how much it will cost. But however, I believe if it's not taxpayers' money, it will be money meant for the people of this country. And as short, I want him to serve his conscience and not political state actors. I want also to see to it that he's properly monitored, owing to the fact his work's been compromised, and I don't want that to repeat again. So that is why we are not saying he should not serve in the commission.
Thank you very much. Yes. Thank you very much, Saidu Bangura, Executive Director of Initiative for Democracy and the Rule of Law. Well, Mr. Minister, it's like Saidu has given a go ahead. But what I wanted to ask, that if questions like these come up and there is adequate proof to show that he cannot lead this commission of inquiry, will the government listen and change him?
Well, I have said from the outset...
I'm just saying if. Just in case.
Well, I don't want to speculate, because I have said that government has done its due diligence and has consulted widely before electing on that preference. So I know what it means. And, you know, for us as government, we have made a determination that this is in the public interest, and you can't go wrong at that highest level. And so it is indeed very important that we appreciate the fact that as civil society, will continue to play our role as the watchdog of our institutions, which is a role that Saidu is playing. But at the end of the day, Saidu himself has said that, well, we are not saying let him don't serve, but let him serve his conscience. So it means, in a way, Saidu as well has issued a certificate of clearance for Bell George Will to continue operating. But I think what that speaks to is the fact that as civil society organizations, it means we also must not lower the standard of our scrutiny, you know, which for me is very much important. But now that he's given him a certificate of clearance, for us that's good to hear. But over and above that, President Julius Maada Bio, when he assumed the office of president, he took and subscribed to the oath of the presidency, and he vowed to uphold the constitution. So it's very much important that as a country, even for us as government, you know, would continue to complement this process to make sure, in a way, we also jealously guard the integrity of the commission, because it's important. At the end of the day, we want the commission to have fair, just, and equality defined platforms, so that persons who would go before this commission would understand fully well that their rights are upheld, that this commission recognizes what their rights are, and that there is due process at all levels. For us, that is very important, and we will never want to see a situation where those standards are lowered.
Okay, thank you very much. This is the Podium, coming to you live on SLBC television in Freetown. We go for a short break. When we come back, we continue with the program. The program is The Podium, coming to you live on SLBC television in Freetown. Be reminded that you can be part of it and send your messages to 088-373-504. Well, over again to the Deputy Minister of Information and Communication, Solomon Jamiru. Well, some people have a cynical view of commissions of inquiry, seeing them as an excuse for government not to do anything.
It depends on how we contextualize that, but I think it's very important. Had it not been important, it would not have featured in our constitution. For the draftsmen of our constitution to consider that it's very important to the point that it becomes a provision in our constitution demonstrates its significance. And so that's why in section 147 subsection 1 it says that President by statutory instrument would appoint a commission when Cabinet resolves that there is a matter of public interest to be investigated, or Parliament passes a resolution in that direction. So I think it's very important. Had it not been important, it would not have been provided for in our constitution. And it's not only in Sierra Leone that we have commissions of inquiry. It dates far back in history. You know, as part of the English Commonwealth, we also practice the English legal system. You had, for example, in England, what they call the Tribunals of Inquiry, Evidence Act of 1921. India, for example, which is also an English common law, they also have a Commission of Inquiry Act of 1952. So commissions of inquiry are all over the place, you know. So it's not only in Sierra Leone, but it is something that is rarely adopted and applied. We understand fully well that we have a court system that would perform judicial roles. You have other agencies like the ACC, the Audit Service Commission, but it's because the draftsmen of our constitution considered the crucial and specific roles that commissions of inquiry could play, and recognizing their relevance, that is why it was indeed provided for in our constitution. But as I said, it is rarely used. But as long as there is a determination that there is an issue of public importance that warrants some investigation, that's when a commission of inquiry could be set up.
Now that you stated the importance of it, would it be needless to say that some commissions of inquiry are appointed to delay action or recommend a course of action that the government does not intend to take?
Well, it's difficult, but I would say if Cabinet has resolved that there is an issue of public importance or matters of public importance to be investigated, I think it's because Cabinet in its determination would want to see the recommendations of a commission have some kind of implication. Okay. Which does not mean that if the commission comes up with any recommendation, government is saying whatever recommendation you come up with, we are in a position to enforce them. That's not the point. Okay. I mean, government has to have a very clear and unambiguous objective, and it has to be in the best interest of the country. Okay. Let's don't forget, when the GTT was set up, you know, there were people were saying this is a witch hunt. Now that we're talking about the Commission of Inquiry, people are also saying it's a witch hunt. On the part of government, government would only want to validate those things ascribed to the Commission of Inquiry that government believes would be in the best interest of our nation. Because whilst we're talking about the Commission of Inquiry, government also believes that everybody has certain fundamental rights enshrined in our Constitution, and it is important that we have due process along the way. So when the Commission of Inquiry would have disposed of its proceedings and would have generated its report, government would have to go through that report, and government would come up with its own position, but in the best interest of our country.
Okay, inside you mentioned the cost. Let's talk about it. How much will it cost the people, and where will this money come from?
At this point, I don't have an idea of what the financials are. Okay. And also we know that when usually we have matters of the public interest, sometimes we also don't have a clear outline as to what the source of that finance is. It could be a government donor thing, it could be a donor thing, okay, or it could be wholly internally generated. Okay. But I don't have what the magnitude of that cost is at the moment. But anytime I have it, it's possible that very soon it might just be put into the public domain.
Okay. Okay, let's take some of the text messages. This one says, I'm dismayed at the statement of Solomon Jamiru supporting a process of setting up a commission of inquiry. The SLPP has laid the constitutional instrument and have deprived members of parliament to discuss the constitutional instruments of the commission of inquiry. This is a clear pointer that the SLPP has a hidden agenda. Please, Mr. Bangura, cross-check your facts on Judge Will, who is an appeal court judge. The SLPP is not honest in the fight against corruption. Their aim and target is to disintegrate the APC and prosecute APC members from the north. The Commission of Inquiry is characterized with a selective justice scope of suppressing the APC opponents. If you want to fight corruption, start from 1992 to 2007. This is a case of hunting and oppression of opponents. Or SLPP, setting up a commission against the past government tells you that this government doesn't want peace and tranquility to strive in the country. Why not a Sierra Leonean judge? The terms of reference of the commission says all former officials that served in the 10 years of President Nkrumah. What if those that served continue to serve in this new direction? Well, those are some of the messages, Mr. Jamini.
It's always a mixed bag, and you know, sometimes in moving forward, the less said about some things, the better. But just to be very clear, this is not a witch hunting exercise. Let's go back. Before he assumed office as president of this republic, before it pleased the majority of Sierra Leoneans to vote him into office to serve as their country's CEO, on several platforms, retired Brigadier Julius Maada Bio had been making promises relating to accountability, rule of law, fighting corruption. So the issue about doing the GTT or having a commission of inquiry, this is not something upon assuming office that somebody just got there and whispered into his ears. Those were things, I mean, the fight against corruption, rule of law, accountability, transparency. I mean, they featured in his campaign promises. So there is consistency at every level. By and large, His Excellency the President has always reiterated it, that upon his assumption, he's not only president of SLPP, he's president of the Republic of Sierra Leone. He understands that fully well, and he will jealously guard that fully well. And so that's why it's important at this point that looking at the kind of pedigree that those two gentlemen will come with, the kind of experience they have, the kind of stature they have on judicial platforms, it's very important for us to go through this process. And I believe the Commission of Inquiry understands that there are rights to be upheld, there is due process to be availed, and it will not lower the standards. So for persons who are saying that this government is only interested in harassing, intimidating, and bringing to account APC persons, look, I mean, everywhere we go upon assuming office, every executive has its own terms of reference. When former President Nkrumah set up its own, it had to look at activities of former ministers, and specifically also one of the examples was the Sababu project. It did not go beyond what happened. It did not go beyond Tijan Kaba's reign as president. I mean, so he clearly got his own portfolio to deal with as Commission of Inquiry. So I think we have to respect the terms of reference of this executive. And I think any executive that could come into post would have to formulate its own terms of reference. And I think we have to respect this executive. We have to respect His Excellency the President. He's very clear as to what he wants, and he's very, very much committed to upholding due process and the Constitution.
And also, before we go to the last set of text messages, some people were saying that the Commission of Inquiry will just look at names mentioned in the GTT report, whilst there are other people out there who were sacked because of corruption offences, like Musa Tarawali, some other people, and even parliamentarians. We know that they take these the constituency development funds, they get donor funds, and they don't account for them properly. Why would they also be involved in the Commission of Inquiry?
Okay, first thing first. I think for us, it's not really. We are not honoring the debates. We are not giving to the debates the kind of honor that it is due. So I would say to Sierra Leoneans that if you think over and above the categories of persons who have been named in the Commission of Inquiry, you think there is also any other person of trust who may have served in the past regime, and you think that somebody is culpable, somebody has been corrupt, and you have the evidence, nothing has ever stopped any Sierra Leonean to go to the appropriate authority and say, this is what I have against that person who served as minister, or who served as president, or who served as vice president. And let's also bear this in mind. You know, one of the terms of reference of the Commission of Inquiry is if anybody had acted in connivance or had colluded with any of those persons named in the categories. So indeed, it might be, we could have a large expanse of persons, but if you think also as a Sierra Leonean, you have something against somebody who's not been named in that report, I mean, nothing stops you from coming forward as a Sierra Leonean citizen. So I think that the Commission of Inquiry has its own terms of reference, and as much as they can, they will stick to them. But if they consider it necessary to also have some other persons included, nothing stops them. Now,
final text messages. Are there no qualified judges in Sierra Leone to head that commission? This is a slap on the face of the judiciary. Said Bangura is right. We want a fair trial. Already, the Chief Minister has referred to former officials as thieves and criminals. It is really sad. I think the Commission of Inquiry is in place to fight corruption. We must end impunity in Sierra Leone. The judge must be aware that he is here for the people and not the SLPP government. Well, this last one says, Saidu is an APC defender. That judge is a fine personality. You cannot take that from him. Well, in a second.
Just like I keep saying, this judge must serve his conscience. However, again, the issue, the person made mention of whether there are no fine judges in the states, again, is an issue that bothers my mind. You know, if we have very fine judges in this country, these are people with fine, reputable character. The president, in his opening statement at the House of Parliament, he said he is going to, a few weeks ago, he has a press release from State House, which reads that he is going to appoint a foreign judge alongside a local this judge. No, wait. This judge is going to serve as the chairman and sole commissioner, which means he's going to head the entire commission.
Okay.
You understand? So that is the question. That is where the issue boils. He promised of getting us a chairman who is serve maybe as a foreign judge, and then as a judge as a commissioner. But at the end, we've just seen this particular man coming as a chairman and a sole commissioner at the same time.
Thank you very much. And we end with the minister in a few seconds. What more do we need to know about this commission?
Well, just to keep our ears open, and of course, the instrument has been tabled for 21 days, and the rest of the process would continue. And on the part of government, I would say that the fight against corruption, the fight for probity, the fight to pursue rule of law, accountability, and transparency. This government is not doing this because it wants to create a standard for a certain set of people and a totally different standard for itself. We want to have a standard that is applicable to all of us, from the presidency right down. Let's understand the work of the commission within a context, and let's always know it's a fact-finding mission. Once it generates its report and makes recommendations, government will look at those recommendations and they will be applied in the best interest. So this commission would guarantee due process at all levels.
Okay, thank you very much, the Deputy Minister of Information and Communications, Solomon Jamiu. Well, that's how we end Podium for this afternoon. My producer has been Salmata Ba. Our quote for today came from Calclus, and he's an author, and it says, "Corruption is worse than prostitution. The latter might endanger the morals of an individual. The former invariably endangers the morals of the entire country." Well, that's it for the Podium this afternoon. Good afternoon. Many thanks for being part of the Podium. My name is Daphne Sainakama. Thanks for watching.